request the chairperson of the session, Dr. Nagesh Kumar, Director and Chief Executive, Institute for Studies in Industrial Development, New Delhi, to please grace the dais. The panelists in this session are Professor Ajit Ranade. He's an economist, former Chief Economist of Aditya Birla Group, and former Vice-Chancellor of Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune. I request Dr. Ranade to please come on the dais. Dr. Sabyasachi Saha, Associate Professor, Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, New Delhi. Please come on the dais. Professor S.K. Mohanty, he's Professor, Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, New Delhi. And Professor Dipankar Sengupta, Professor, Department of Economics, University of Jammu. Request him to please grace the dais. I request Professor Nagesh Kumar to please conduct the session.
Good morning. Let me begin by thanking the organizers, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, my very dear friend and colleague, and Professor Alak Sharma for really getting me to this very beautiful city and very beautiful campus. Again, I was here 2 years ago. And to discuss about something which is most challenging, most topical theme of the day about the current challenges in trade and tariffs. And we all read about Trump tariffs. And to discuss that, we have very excellent, very eminent panel to do that. Just to set the context, I'll speak for a few minutes because we have very compressed time schedule. The Honorable Governor is going to be here and we have to get ready for that session. So I've been told that we will have a compressed schedule for this session. And so just very quickly to set the stage for this discussion in this session, I think we have been seeing a lot of change over the past decade in the area of trade. As you remember, globalization was sold to everyone that this is the engine of growth. You export your way through poverty reduction and grow very fast through exporting manufactured goods. And some countries in Southeast Asia, for instance, grew very fast, very rapidly, and industrialized, the newly industrialized countries. And but then this era of globalization, came to a very kind of grinding halt after the global financial crisis of 2007, 8, and 9. After that, the world trade growth has actually been, very, very anemic, if at all. So 0%, 1%, 2%, compared to the, the early part of this century when average annual trade growth would be, about 20% per year. So the deglobalization is the word. So that has been one phenomenon. On top of that, the trade wars, US-China trade war, and it's not in the current regime of Mr. Trump, but it started already in Mr. Obama's presidency and then Biden presidency when very high tariffs were imposed on Chinese exports and China retaliated, so there was a flagration of a trade war. And then came Mr. Trump administration who believes in reciprocal tariffs, which is not reciprocal, actually one-sided tariffs. So he wants a 0% access to your markets, but he will impose at least 10%, but 20%, 25%, and on India and Brazil, 50%. So outrageous kind of tariffs have been imposed on India. And Of course, when you have your biggest trade partner imposing 50% tariff on your export, it's a very bad, very severe shock. However, as we know, Indian economy is sustained by domestic consumption, which accounts for over 65% of our GDP. And so, in terms of growth rate of GDP, the impact may not be very substantial. We have all been making different calculations, and so you find that maybe 20 to 50 basis points or 0.2 to 0.5% kind of dip in growth rate might happen because of these tariffs. But major impact is going to be on employment and MSME. Why? Because the labor-intensive industries like textiles and garments, leather goods, food process industries, the gems and jewelry, shrimp, for instance. So the US is a major market for these industries. The labor-intensive industries exports of labor-intensive industries. I found that, to my shock, 33% of them or more percent of these labor-intensive exports go to one single country, that is United States. Although United States share in total exports of India is under 20%, but for labor-intensive industries, it is more than 33%. And these are the industries which are dominated by MSMEs. They account for 40% of all our employment related to manufacturing sector. So the impact on these labor-intensive sectors would be very substantial. And what we have to do are 2-3 things. One is, of course, to negotiate better terms with the United States. That, fortunately, the negotiations are back on track. But more than that, to find alternative sources for these products, alternative destinations or markets for these products. And one is our own domestic market. So using or exploiting or targeting our domestic market better, much more effectively. And for that, the GST relaxations or GST reforms 2.0, which have been launched last month and became effective from 22nd of September, is a very important major step. Second is to find markets in other countries, and in that context, the FTA with EFTA countries, which includes Switzerland, it has become effective from this month. The UK FTA has been signed and ratified recently. Last week only, we had the Prime Minister of UK visiting us. And then expediting the FTA with the European Union is another step, and we hope to conclude that very quickly. And so with that, all of European markets will open up for us. That could be an important step. But the other thing is the Japan and Korea. With these two countries, we have operational, functional, FTAs already on, and somehow we have not been able to make inroads in these markets for labor-intensive products. So that should be another priority. So I don't want to take more time because we have a very compressed schedule. So I want to, with these, some opening remarks, to set the context. Since we have a very good panel of very eminent trade economists, I want to turn to them. And the first one on my list is Professor Ajit Ranade. Ajit has been chief economist of the Aditya Birla group, so he has a long experience of private sector, and I hope he can reflect on how India's garment exporters could handle this challenge. Having worked in Aditya Birla Group, which has a very big stake in this sector, This is one issue, and after serving the Aditya Birla group for many years, he moved to academics and became Vice-Chancellor of Gokhale Institute in Pune. And so I want to invite Ajit to take the floor and very quickly. So because of this compressed time, we will have, for the initial remarks, 8 minutes each, if everyone agrees to that, and then we can have some discussion. So over to you, Ajit.
Thank you, Chairman, Mr. Nagesh Kumar, and good morning to all of you. So I'll very quickly go through the presentation. We have only 8 or 9 minutes, so here goes. Just 2 slides on stylized facts. While we are talking today, it's all about President Trump. Let's not pretend it's something else, because if Mr. President Trump had not initiated all those very disruptive actions, we would not be having this session. But I want to remind you of some of the stylized facts from the external economy front of India. Number one, that the economic expansion in India has been going on continuously for 40 years, since 1979. Not a single year where actually GDP contracted, except for the pandemic year, which is a remarkable resilience, because this long period had 11 different governments of shades of left and right and center, perhaps. We had many macroeconomic shocks. I just want to quickly mention 1991 was the currency crisis, 97 was the East Asian crisis, 98 was the nuclear sanctions India had to face, 2001 was the dot-com bust, 2008 was the global financial crisis, 2011 was the sovereign debt crisis in Europe, 2013 was the taper tantrum in India, 2018 was the ILFS crisis, 2020 was the pandemic, 2025 is Mr. Trump. So I'm not even mentioning the weather shocks of droughts and floods and all that. So we must remember that this is the only large Asian country which has a consistent trade deficit. Consistently, our trade account is negative, and yet we have a surplus on the capital account, which is showing the investors' confidence in bringing dollars into India. India is short of dollars. Who is supplying the dollars? Foreigners. So a cumulative inflow of FDI into India over this period is $1 trillion. A negative economy getting $1 trillion, that just shows the resilience and the strength of the Indian economy. The trade to GDP ratio today is 50%. So this shows the degree of openness of the economy. And of course, the two of the highest foreign exchange earners in India, which is possibly not very well known, is number one is remittances from Indian labor and diaspora about $140 billion, highest in the world for the last 20 years, much ahead of China, and software. Second sheet of stylized facts. Foreign debt is, while 19% of GDP, which is much lower than many of our peer countries, especially developing countries, but foreign debt is negligible, nearly zero. So that is very different from Argentina and many other countries. Secondly, the net FDI used to be 2% of GDP. So this domestic savings rate at 34%, 2% FDI, so there is 36% available. But this is something to worry about, because now net FDI has gone down to zero. The other thing to worry about is that non-financial savings of households are now 70% in real estate and gold, because this growth, this domestic savings is required to power growth. If we are going to be resilient against Trump tariffs, the domestic savings story is very important, but now the 70% of savings are in real estate and gold. Average trade-weighted import duties, which used to be coming down from in the early parts of 2000, they've been going up. And of course, the production-linked incentives, PLI, has been protected by import duties. We must remember the growth stories from the East. That is the first tigers, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, then the cubs, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and then of course, and not to forget the earliest tiger, which is Japan, and so on. It was all export-oriented growth. It was all initially export of labor-intensive manufacturing. It was all about transition from manufacturing to services. This is an important recounter. This diagram here shows that the GDP, global trade, the center of gravity of GDP has been shifting east steadily for the last 40 years. I won't go into the story of Japan, which has been growing at 0% GDP growth rate for the last 35 years, and it's still the third largest economy in the world. Growth of 0% for 35 years, and still the largest economy in the world. So something to learn from Japan. India's 6 structural growth drivers, which are impervious to business cycles, weather cycles, macroeconomic shocks, whatever have you. These are structural drivers which are very resilient. Number one, demography. Number two, the pace of urbanization. Number three, the expanding digital footprint. Number four, the renewable energy mix going away from fossil fuels more and more towards domestically available renewable energy. Number five is the infrastructure deficit catch-up, which has to be done whichever government is in power. And number six is now exports as a driver of growth. So why do exports matter for India's growth? Because they are a critical growth engine. We cannot say that we'll be an autarkic economy. I don't need to say this to this audience, but it needs to be repeated. Secondly, exports augment domestic demand. Domestic demand is not enough to propel sustained, inclusive, and high growth of 8 or 9%. We need that export component. Today, exports are 21% of GDP. They provide scale, productivity, spillovers, high-wage jobs, and also management know-how, techniques that come as embedded in the FDI. Services exports have, in fact, cushioned India's slowdown in manufactured goods in last year. So the policy goal to be diversify away from the US markets, cut costs in the tradable sectors. These are the headwinds that we are navigating. I think what the actions of President Trump are nothing but a US-China Cold War. I call it Cold War 2.0. And we have the US tariff shock, then we have higher costs and uncertainty, the growth moderation, and a possible recession in the United States. The United States has become an unreliable partner when it comes to trade, international trade, finance, clearing, dollar clearing, foreign policy, alliances, and also international security. Multilateral institutions like the WTO, World Bank, and the IMF have been weakening, and partly because of US actions, and they need reform. We have to do a very complicated geo-balancing act. On one hand, we want to support Ukraine, but on the other hand, we have to support Russia. In the Iran-Israel conflict, we are on both sides. So this is a complicated, geopolitical balancing. On one hand, we are with Quad. On the other hand, we are with BRICS. There's also this phenomenon of de-dollarization. We live in a relatively unfriendly neighborhood, I must say. So we have to, this neighborhood-first policy needs strengthening. And global growth is moderating. I think I'll skip this slide because just to show that the dollar index has fallen the sharpest in the last 50 years. And the total reserves in the world, which used to be 80% in US dollars, have come down to 58%. This has been gradually happening. More and more countries want to go away from the dollar, which is something that the United States does not like because the hegemony of the US dollar gives them a disproportionate benefit in the world, but we don't probably have time today to discuss this. So what has changed under Trump 2.0? This is his second presidency. Remember, he was president from 2016 to 20 and again in 24. What is new? Well, very high tariffs across the board and surcharges and penalizing India. India is facing the highest penalty, 50% tariffs on textile, gems and jewelry, as Mr. Nagesh Kumar said, on seafood, shrimps, light engineering. So everything is affected so far. I mean, not services, but manufacturing. So what is the objective? Seems to be that he wants to bring back jobs back to America, reshore supply chains, increasing bargaining leverage. And of course, for us, the spillover is increased compliance costs, shipment delays, renegotiation, etc., etc. But another thing that ostensibly the president of US is trying to put pressure on is that India is buying Russian crude oil, which is for him a very big negative. But implicit in that is a great hypocrisy because India's purchase of Russian crude oil is less than that of China, is less than that of the EU. But they're not facing any penalty. So there's some kind of geopolitical hypocrisy, but that's a fact. So India's exposure now, as he said, is in all labor-intensive exports are affected. As Mr. Nagesh Kumar said, textiles and apparel, leather, footwear, jewelry, seafood, which is shrimp. The shrimp industry in eastern India, Andhra Pradesh, is very badly affected, and machinery parts. The effective duties are in double digits. It is also, this bad news is also overlapping with a weak demand globally for trade and higher logistics costs, which is amplifying the shock. Also watch out for new developments like rules of origin tightening. If India says that we will ship our goods to Dubai and export it from Dubai, Mr. Trump is going to say, no, we have to have rules of origin, so value addition in Dubai has to be substantial, in which case India's strategy may not work. And so this is something, a lot of these non-tariff barriers are going to be erected against Indian. Then additionally, there is on the services sector, there is an H-1B squeeze, the work visas, which are 70 to 80% given to Indians for working in the United States. There's a huge squeeze and a huge penalty on that, $100,000, $1 lakh. So this is going to affect on-site staffing, costlier margins are going to be impacted. By the way, India's export of software services is today at about $250 billion, some milake. But in the next few years, they expect it to be $500 billion. Can you believe it? But this is NASSCOM's official estimates. But that is something that seems to be targeted in Mr. Trump's policies. So I'll just quickly, this immediate impact over India's, of these tariffs is margin squeeze, especially MSME sector, because they're in the value chain, supply chain. There's potential market share loss to competitors with better US access who don't have these penal tariffs against them. And of course, services are resilient, but the mix will, move towards offshore. Strangely, what is going to happen is because Trump is trying to protect American jobs, strangely, they are going to do more outsourcing. They are not giving H-1B visas, so more and more work will come to India. So this is a very strange thing. The other thing is that putting restrictions on students going to America, so more and more students will now want to study in Indian colleges. So it's either way, and US universities will be badly hit. So this is something that I think there will be some pushback. So our strategy is market diversification. Just 2 more minutes. Yeah. So free trade agreements with the UK, European Union, Australia, this is all in the pipeline, and some of it is already concluded. I think this is a resilience thing. Secondly, of course, I hope Mr. Chairman will agree with me that I have been always a strong proponent of joining RCEP. So I think there is now talk of again joining RCEP, which we decided not to join in 2019. More engagement with China on the trade and investment front, deepen ASEAN relationships, and deepen the alliances with SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and BRICS. So finally, there's also scope for diplomacy, that behind the scenes diplomacy to reduce the escalation of this harsh tariffs from the US. And this is the policy playbook in the near term, tariff shock with domestic reforms essentially, and services, the onshoring services back to India. This is the last slide, that remember that India's source of resilience is this fall. We have a large domestic market. That's a big source of resilience. Our government's CapEx support is very significant. Industrial policy is helping. Social insurance like free food grains, universal health insurance, the employment guarantee scheme. There's fiscal prudence, fiscal consolidation. Recent upgrades by various sovereign rating agencies. So that is showing the confidence of global investors in India, and there's policy tailwinds. So I think that's where I'll start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ajit. And sorry to rush you. It was very comprehensive overview of the challenges India is facing. At this juncture, you also highlighted some of the strengths or resilience of Indian economy, the macro fundamentals, and all that. But criticality of exports, and I think among the number of things you mentioned which are being done and which are needed, I fully endorse the rethinking on RCEPs, and also strengthening our bonds with other countries in the global south. So we'll come back to some of these issues. Let me turn to our next speaker, and if I could invite Professor Mohanty first before you. Professor Mohanty has been a stalwart at the RIS, and I happen to be in RIS a long time I spent before Sachin took over. And Professor Mohanty has been a pillar of that institution's research. And he works on trade-related issues for a very long time, so I'm sure he will be able to give us some additional guidance. Go ahead, please.
So thank you, Chair.
And again, 8 to 10 minutes. Ajit has been very disciplined, but yeah. Don't worry.
So thank you, Chair. I must thank the organizers, Sajjan Chaturvedi ji and Professor Sharma, for inviting me to this. Uh, so you will all agree with me that the tariff imposed by the new Trump administration has created havoc in the global economy. It has its own impact on different countries, including that of India. And at this stage, it is important that India should now have two alternatives, whether it should retaliate or to, reconcile with the Trump administration so that a new strategy can be adopted. There are possibilities of going for FTAs or with export diversification, again also with dealing with South-South countries to have export diversification that would help. Now, coming to the US, actually the US, it is a problem for US for continuously since 2002 till now, huge trade deficit for the country. And it is important to note that during buoyancy, US has got huge trade deficit and it declined when recession came in. But one thing is very clear, which is very stylish fact that whenever US trade is growing, it is contributing to US trade deficit. Now, if you look at in 2024, that what are those countries contributing to trade deficit of US? There are two different sets of countries, four countries, China, Mexico, Canada, and EU in one hand, and other countries on the other hand. India is the ninth largest trade surplus country vis-a-vis US. But when you discuss about the trade laws that can be imposed to restrict trade deficit of US, there are several laws with the government. But the one law, that is International Agency Economic Power Act, is more important, and US is particularly the Trump administration is very strongly using this act consistently. Now, looking at the tariff imposed by Trump 2 administration, it found that in March when it was imposed, I think it was pretty high for most of the countries, including that of India. But in April, it was in the next announcement, I think it is reduced for most of the ASEAN countries except for Philippines and Brunei. But in case of India, it was quite substantial. But if you compare between India, ASEAN countries, and Big Four, I think it is not that strong for the Big Fours. So therefore, the Trump is not sincerely targeting countries in terms of reducing its trade gaps. Now, in the Trump 1 administration, if you look at the kind of tariff, we can see that if you divide them into the primary commodities by the resource-based products, low technology products, medium and high technology products, the tariff has been quite substantial for low-intensive products that we can see, and the lowest for the technology-intensive products. So, one can also see that over the years, the tariff also declined during tariff 1 period. So we can also expect that the level of tariff would come down in subsequent years. So far as India's surplus is concerned with the US, it is quite substantial and it has been growing over the years. But if we look at that how US is going to really act in terms of reducing its tariff, there are only 475 products where US import is more than $1 billion, and therefore in those brackets you can see that India is falling in case of only 124 products. Even with that, India has got a huge trade deficit with India. Now, coming to India's trade composition by end use, you can see that India has got only trade deficit in one area, that is primary commodities, because of the import of fuel. But in all other sectors, whether it is intermediate or final, within the intermediate, semi-finished products, parts and components, in the final products, it is capital goods and final goods. In all segments, India has got a trade surplus over a period of time. Even in the technology-intensive products, where we have got a lot of discussion, in all sectors except primary products, you can look at that resource-intensive goods in agriculture, low technology, medium technology, and high technology goods, in all segments, India has got a trade surplus with the US. So, not what policy space we have got. Structurally, if you see that India has got a trade surplus with the US, and US is continuing to have trade deficit with not only with India, with many countries. In agriculture, you can see that it has got advantage in edible fruits and nuts. In mining sector, it has got the advantage, but we can also retaliate in that case. In the manufacturing sector, there are certain areas where it has got the advantage, but in almost all areas, India has got advantage vis-a-vis the US. Now, if you want to really reconcile with the US, I think that is possible. Already in March, Prime Minister already signed Mission 500 with the US, where we want to raise the total trade of India and the US to the extent of $500 billion. But what we can see here is that if you want to achieve that, I think you have to go in double-digit growth, both in exports and imports, which is not happening at this point of time. So this projection, we have tried to see that if we really reach $500 billion in goods and services to US, what should be the structure? So now the question is that you want to diversify, then how the world economy is prepared for that? So one can see that in the global economy, the openness of the global economy has increased over the years during the period of buoyancy between 2002 2007. But with the recession, there were fluctuations. But in recent years, you can see in recession phase 2, there is considerable level of progress in the world economy. Looking at the end-use structure of the world economy, where you take more than 169 countries, just try to see that in case of primary goods, it is declining, whereas in case of intermediate and final goods, global economy is growing over the years. Coming to the area of technology-intensive goods, between North and South, if you want to see, between 2002 to 2013, there is a dominance of developed countries in technology-intensive exports. But now, things have reversed. Now, technology exports has been quite substantial for, or larger for developing countries over the developed countries. So, in terms of GBC, also we can also see the same structure. So, in case of India, in agriculture, you can see that it is again in the area of upstream segment, it is quite substantial. But India has to catch up with the down segment in the subsequent years. There's a comparison between India and other countries, both including developed and developing countries, where you can see that India has to grow and has to improve its export performance in the area of midstream segment in the agriculture exports. So, in the global trade, I think it is still the dominance of developed and developing countries. India is in the downstream segment of agriculture, GBC. India is contributing just 0.7%, but other countries are quite substantial in this segment. So now what policy options we have? Now, what if you see the graph that over the years since 2000, India has signed and implemented FTAs, and now in the second phase of FTAs, new countries, particularly from developing countries, are joining India in the FTAs. Now, from FTAs, what exactly we want? We want that the volume should increase. We want that bilateral trade deficit should come down. But we don't mind if bilateral deficit is growing, but it should contribute in terms of reducing overall trade deficit of the country. Then in the end use segment, what do you want that primary good exports should reduce, and we should also depend more on intermediates, both exports and imports. And in the final goods, we expect that capital goods should be more. We don't mind, but definitely our exports in the consumer goods, final consumer goods, should come down. Whether it is really happening or not, one has to see in FTAs. Here we try to show that the trade deficit that we see from FTA countries and non-FTA countries. The red line showing that the trade deficit as a proportion of the total trade of India in terms of the total trade, and the golden line showing that the non-preferential countries' deficit with India. So this particular graph is clearly indicating that FTAs are really helping India in terms of improving its exports. Now, my last point is about the China factor. China, where India is strongly linked, more than $100 billion trade deficit, and we imported more than 4,000 products at 6-digit HS. What we see in 2023...
Mohanty, quickly please.
Just minute. So only 312 products constituting 70% of our imports from China. And if that will happen, that we really depend more on China, that will add to your trade deficit. An empirical estimate showing that any incremental increase of our imports from China is straightway contributing to our trade deficit with China. This is a question. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mohanty. I think you highlighted a number of important points. Also, how India can get better value from the agricultural product exports, and how we should, make use of the Chinese market more into that, and we are running very strong, very large and widening trade deficit with China. Why, we should not make bigger inroads in China's market and make that trade more balanced. Very important points. We'll come back to them, and especially, to some very eminent agricultural economists, Professor Mahendra Dev and Professor Dalwai are sitting here. I'm sure they will take it up. So I want to turn to our next speaker, and maybe Professor Dipankar Sengupta. Professor Sengupta is at the Department of Economics in University of Jammu, and he has been writing and researching on matters relating to trade for a very long time. I'm sure we'll have some insightful presentations.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
And again, very quickly,
Sure.
so 8 minutes. Yeah.
Let me start with a bit of a disagreement.
Sorry for...
Professor Ranade spoke about the Indian market being limited. If a nation of 1.4 billion constitutes a limited market, then I think we have a serious problem. I believe that we have enough macro tools to ensure that our domestic market can expand to provide for growth. The problem with that is the following, that if you are an expanding economy, your import demand rises, and therefore I look at export policy in line with Milton Friedman as something that a country has to do to pay for its imports, not necessarily to overcome the limitations of the domestic market. A single producer or a businessman may turn to exports and will turn to exports if he finds his domestic market limited, but that will depend on which sector he is in and the kind of businessman he is in. The problem is the following. Whether I am for export-led growth or I want to pay for my imports, our merchandise trade deficit has always been very, very large. So that distinction in a sense becomes academic because our exports have to be pushed because we have to pay for our imports, which currently, as Professor Ranade said, we can't. We have been running a consistent trade deficit for a long period of time, dependent on flows from outside, apparently a sign of our confidence. We never know when it will run out, so that we don't face a particular crisis. This is, of course, not a sustainable policy, and therefore, we have to look at export growth. Now, our problem, as Professor Nagesh Kumar said, is the following, that if you look at our exports, our largest market happens to be the United States, 18%, and much of our labor-intensive exports, jewelry and apparel, go to the United States. And it is precisely these particular segments that the United States has targeted. What is the impact on growth? Not much. What is the impact on employment? Because it's labor intensive, the employment will be considerable. What do we do about this? Now, if you, again, even when it comes to services, the United States happens to be our largest market, software, offshoring and all that. I think that's less vulnerable to pressures for a very simple reason. If you look at offshoring, our exports, 200 billion, does not reflect the true saving that American companies do. It is much, much more. So if that is targeted, the profitability of American corporations will fall so much that 44% of American households who are invested in the American stock market will be affected. So taking action against that is not something that I'm taking up seriously, but then this is Donald Trump, who knows? So what do we do when it comes to goods? The fact is, traditionally, we've always been not a low-cost producer, we've always targeted the niche markets. And yet, when it comes to brand creation, we have been extremely backward. Now, brand creation, when you have atomized producers, exporters, is difficult. But that doesn't mean that we didn't have to do it. What does brand creation do? If you own the brand, then a rise in costs, such as this tariffs entail, enables you to impart some inelasticity to your market. You are protected for some reason. Of course, if it's hiked to 200%, nobody can save you. But I think even a 25% tariff would have been handleable if we had owned the brands. Look at the Chinese example, Huawei. Huawei developed a brand even when the Huawei goods were not for the elite. They were basically low-cost items. But today, Huawei is a brand which enables Huawei to withstand shocks if those shocks takes place, because there is some inelasticity associated with that particular brand. That is something we did not do. We could have done, both with respect to jewelry and as with respect to apparel. Now, brand creation is, of course, one example. The other thing, as people have talked about, is reduction of concentration of exports. Now, people have talked about FTAs. Let us also look at our non-traditional markets. The fact is, people do these gravity models, they come up with certain results. So I forced my scholar to look at some of our non-traditional markets in all continents. And we find out that if you look at their top 5 imports and our top 5 exports, in many cases, there are common goods. Now, we have to ask ourselves how we can crack that particular market. By the way, the Chilean market, automotive market, has been cracked by Mahindra. So if the Chilean market has been cracked by Mahindra, can we look at other Indian manufacturers trying to expand their global presence into cracking other markets? Taken individually, those markets may not be large, but if you take them in their totality, I think the impact will be quite large. Now, let's come to services. Now, there is a commentator, Surya Kanegaonkar. He looks at the IT firms and he has a very good description for them. He calls them one-trick ponies. Basically, no matter they've given us a yeoman service for all these years, $200 billion is good, but essentially we are taking advantage of labor arbitrage. Now, okay, there is a stage of development, you do that. But when you had your own CEOs asking you to invest in new technologies, AI, and I'm talking about Mr. Sikka, I'm talking about Infosys, they had to part ways. Look at what the Chinese have done. The Chinese have invested about $200 million in DeepMind. Now, you may say it's not 200, it's probably 400 with Chinese government assistance coming in. But even $400 million is a fraction of the profits which our ITES majors make every year. And we had the manpower to do it also. They've developed DeepMind. DeepMind is not great shakes. But the fact remains, if DeepMind really took off, who would do the programming? Not Indians. So when a former chairman of the UIDAI tells us, let the big boys in Silicon Valley develop AI, LLMs, and we will develop the applications, that pathway is not as sanguine as we think it is. Because if the Chinese start developing these particular models, they are the ones who will develop your apps, and I fear we will see what was called a reverse 2K moment for us. 2K, the crisis that was to hit us in 2K did not hit us because of the Indian IT majors. We did ourselves and the world a great favor, and as a result of which, our reputation in IT was built for a long period of time. It made our reputation. I fear of a reverse 2K effect if China develops a working AI model and Chinese software corporations start developing apps for it. If that happens, I think we'll be in a very serious problem. And finally, one of the initiatives that people mock is basically Startup India. I think that's the way to go. Startup India is about new technologies, new products, and therefore it means, if it succeeds, it means captive markets. Combined to this is ease of doing business. Doing business in India is still very difficult, especially when you compare it with the People's Republic of China. In China, you plug and play. There are industrial estates, you go with your machinery, plant them, plug and play, you don't get manpower, they will give you manpower. That, I'm afraid we have not reached that. And unless we basically deal with this particular problem, we will be stuck in a particular technology ladder. I remember 20 years ago, we used to say that we occupy a certain position in a technology ladder and the Chinese are way behind us. Those things have changed fundamentally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dipankar, for putting on the table some very important points, which I fully endorse. Firstly, thank you for that. And so emphasizing the importance of brand creation, building national champions, and exploring non-traditional markets. And you gave some important examples for that. That moving and transitioning away from being a process nation to product nation. So these are some of the important takeaways from Dipankar's presentation. Now I turn to our final presenter for this session, and then we will have a few minutes for open discussion, especially when some of the very distinguished economists of the country are sitting here. So over to you, Sabyasachi Saha. Sabya is also a very important key pillar of RIS, the institution. Professor Sachin Chaturvedi very eminently managed for many years, and until he was appointed Vice-Chancellor of Nalanda University. So over to you.
Thank you, sir. It's a great honor for me to be here today, and I'm very grateful to Professor Chaturvedi and Professor Sharma for giving me this opportunity. It is very difficult to speak after such stalwarts, and that too on trade and industrial policy. This is a work in progress, how to demystify some of the policy paradigms that are on us and how we navigate the challenging times, both because of the tariff wars and where we see Indian economy going forward. If we just try to imagine the set of policies that we have on what we say as Atmanirbharta and the emphasis that has come on Swadeshi. Simply put, can we have a conceptualization where we are looking at the supply side policies, which are more as Atmanirbharta. So how we put supply side policies as Atmanirbharta and how we bring in the demand side policies as Swadeshi, and what the combination of this can be implemented. But for me, Atmanirbharta is also looking at our institutions, norms, and regulations, and whether we want institutions being built on Western or colonial norms. We all know that WTO gave us a set of norms, and the world is deviating dramatically from that. The fact that protectionism is on us, it's not new. Developed countries have been practicing it despite WTO. And now it is tariffs, but it was through subsidies and the non-tariff barriers. And definitely the developing countries were at the receiving end. So this is a known story. We have already repeated how India's trade deficit looks like in goods, of course. And then how we are a bit of dependent on China, and how China accounts for a bulk of our trade deficit. But definitely the service sector story needs to be retained when it comes to the exports, and we have just heard from Professor Sengupta as to how we need to be slightly alarmed on the service sector as well. So the combination of goods and services, and where we see the deepening of the domestic content is very, very important. And as we know, this is some reflections on the indicators from the TIVA database. Beyond 95 WTO, the import content has gone up, but something that is slightly reassuring is that the percentage in terms of the import vis-a-vis domestic production in the overall expenditure has somewhat remained stable over the years, and we should try to remain at that. And also where we see the domestic production vis-a-vis imports of products and services, where and it's encouraging that the domestic production part is expanding over the years. I'll skip some of these slides. Again, coming to what US is doing. As you can see, dramatically after 2025, the average tariffs had come down to much less than 5% for US, and it has just shot up. So it's after 1943 that we are seeing such a scenario, and it is going to have a dampening effect on the world economy, as has been reported by the Federal Reserve themselves. And then how we see the India's average tariffs that have come down post-WTO, it's a dramatic reduction, and the commitments that were undertaken by India almost unilaterally to reduce its tariff over the years. And this picture is pretty clear, and we can go into the debates whether India really is the tariff king, which seems to be not. These are the India's import basket, the top 10 products, and the amount of the average tariffs that we have, and then the natural safeguards that we need in terms of agriculture and other sectors, which is visible but not really alarming when it comes to other sectors. So vis-a-vis US also, again, barring agriculture, the top 10 products that we import from the US, we were not really blocking the imports from the US, and that remains the case. And but definitely, as has been mentioned, US remains the biggest source of trade surplus when it comes to good vis-a-vis other countries. So that's something that has worried US the most, that US has been the highest among India's trade partners in terms of the with whom we have the trade surplus at this point. So I'll skip our trading profile with China, and at this point, just to show that China really has, as we can see, the China story is known to all, but more than forward linkages, it's the backward linkages which has been very, very important. So China keeps on producing the final goods. But when we are trying to define Atmanirbhar Bharat policies, what's that we are trying to say? Is it really import substitution? Not really, because if we are trying to develop our manufacturing here and exporting to the world, it is not like the import substitution that we had practiced decades ago when we were a supply-constrained economy. And definitely, it's about strategic self-reliance, as has been mentioned by Professor Sengupta a short while ago. And you know, with technological innovations, if we have technological innovations in place, it's market economy, but a regulated one. And then we do not compromise on the efficiency, because we have learned our lessons from the past when a different set of industrial policies were at play, but the new set of industrial policies, how we overcome the challenges that we had faced with efficiency earlier, that is important, but it is more about value addition. Professor Ranade has mentioned about the 6 important structural drivers of the economy, and that remains very important, but really the question is, how do we create value, because in that. So identifying the areas of value creation and niche areas, and which might propel job creation at that point, is important. So beyond the structural drivers, we need the element of value addition. And we have just discussed the compulsions that we have, because we really are a very large economy and we just cannot be paying for our imports. So that's what the compulsion is. But definitely it is about moving up the value chain. And very simply, we are an automobile success story, but if we can't be an EV success story, then we are stuck. Again, free trade has been a myth over the years, but the trade wars are a reality. So we need to cope with those challenges. I was reviewing all the GATT rounds as to how did negotiations happen at that point, so that the countries were convinced about tariff elimination for a long period of time, but what has gone wrong, that we are going in the reverse direction. So some historical perspective might be important. And this protectionism is not triggered by US alone. We have been seeing it for some time now with the import barriers put by the Europe, then China coming up with export controls at various levels. Now it is affecting US, so US is reacting, but this kind of export controls can affect anyone. And Japan, the kind of protectionist measures they impose on several sectors, including agriculture, is something that we need to be conscious of. So this is a multi-level, when we are dealing with different countries. Again, I'll just skip this because this is in process of deinstitutionalization. I'll just come back to what India perhaps could be doing. Yeah. Of course, India is doing a lot in terms of increasing its exports on high-tech products. It has gone up several times. India's exports of high-tech products have increased 5.06 times from 10.66 billion between 2010 to 2024. So, that's these are the sectoral composition, and I'll just come to these are the import and export partners, and also how we deal with these are the partner countries when we are looking at high-tech sectors, because that is the value addition part that I was talking about, and we can go granular in terms of devising our policies when we see the changes in terms of imports and exports and across sectors. I'll skip the electronic sector, which I had brought in some numbers in detail, but just to conclude, India's industrial policy, starting with Make in India and specific sectoral schemes, the PLI, a part of it has been really successful, from pharma to mobile phones and others. But, there are several things that we need to think of. Industrial policies on one hand in terms of giving incentives. Of course, PLI is not export incentives, so it's WTO compatible. But at the same time, we have just talked about the FTAs, the new age FTAs. India is very boldly going ahead with some of these FTAs, very comprehensive ones, bringing multi-sectors, very sophisticated ones with advanced countries, which India was shying away from a very long time. But now we are quite capable of handling some of the complex issues that were holding us back for a very, very long time. But economic diplomacy remains very crucial, because we cannot get into FTAs with all countries. So economic diplomacy, trade facilitation, mutual recognition agreements and others are going to be very, very crucial in widening the scope of our export markets. And finally, something that I have been working with Professor Chaturvedi for long, how we really look at demand generation in the economy. And demand generation comes from various sources. It's not really the markets, but what exactly we are trying to do beyond Atmanirbharta or Make in India and others. It's about center-state partnership. It is about GST reforms. But more than that, several other policy paradigms on port-level development and infrastructure, as well as something that we need to take note of, this sectoral focus on tourism, rural development, life, women-led development. These have to be integrated with policies on industrialization, entrepreneurship, and demand generation in the economy. So that way, we bring Atmanirbharta and Swadeshi together for creating resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabya. I think you did a good job on highlighting what we could do to keep up the momentum in the economy, and focusing on Atmanirbharta or self-reliance, without affecting the competitiveness is the way forward. And so a lot of things that government is doing, they need to be pushed with greater vigor, industrial policy included. So with that, we have heard all of our panelists, and of course we have to wind up very quickly, because the protocol of the Honorable Governor wants this to be wound up. But I think we can take 10-12 minutes. Professor Alak Sharma told us that up to... So not possible. Okay. So we have to conclude. It's a very strict instruction from the organizing secretary, Professor Mamgai, that we have to stop here. So it's a hard stop. Unfortunately, we could not have a discussion, but I think all four of our speakers raised some very interesting, insightful contributions they made to this debate on how India can really address the challenge of the Trump tariffs and sustain the growth momentum that was referred to by everyone we have had, including by Gabriela in her, the memorial lecture in the previous session, that Indian economy has been growing at around 7% for many years. So that momentum needs to be maintained, which is very important for poverty reduction and inequality reduction, to have inclusive growth and all that. And so we have to, work on all different fronts, opening up our markets in other countries where there could be demand for the products which will be substituted from United States, opening up and exploiting our own domestic market much more, and work on all other aspects of economic policy, development policy, inclusive development, and sustainable development. So on that note, I want to invite you to give a very big round of applause to our four very eminent speakers. Thank you very much.